Hey guys, this is Leeza. So when I was in college, I was an RA or a resident advisor, which basically meant that I was in charge of just making sure everything was okay with all the residents in my dorm. And one day this girl came up to me and she was like, Leeza, I just feel so lonely and sad, and I just look out of my window some days and think that if I died today, no one would care. Would anyone even notice? And if we're perfectly honest with ourselves, I'm sure all of us have actually felt that at some point or the other, especially if you've ever lived alone. In fact, I was reading an article in The Economist about loneliness, and it talked about how doctors and policymakers all over the world are seriously concerned about the impacts of loneliness on global populations. For example, campaigns to reduce loneliness have been launched in Great Britain and Australia and Denmark. And in Japan, the government actually surveys for people that they call hikikomori, which are people who shut themselves up in their homes alone. In fact, in Japan, you can even rent a friend on apps and agencies online. Like, you can hire someone to just come spend time with you, watch TV with you, even mourn at a funeral with you, or even be your girlfriend for the day. In England, I read that Theresa May has appointed a minister for loneliness. And in the US, they've compared loneliness to an epidemic. An epidemic, as if it impacts health as adversely as things like obesity or smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So this was like crazy to me, but I believe it because loneliness is truly something that can impact you in a way that I think is much, much larger than just an emotion. It can actually impact how you feel and therefore also your health. And so I think we need to talk about it. Because even in India, even though it's tempting to think that because there's so many of us, we can't possibly feel alone, actually doesn't have to do with how many people are around you. I think it's just a symptom of the way we lead our lives in modern times. Loneliness is just feeling a lack of connection, feeling like no one understands you, or just feeling unsure of your place in the world. And the thing is, in India, there's so much stigma about talking about your own mental health or emotional well-being that we're stuck pretending like everything's okay all the time, even when it isn't. And so in some ways, maybe many of us feel even more alone. Also, so many people move from smaller cities to bigger cities, or from small towns, and there's so much movement basically that you're kind of, removed from the comfort zone of your family sometimes, or just the social network that you are used to, and that can also be a huge cause for loneliness, particularly with young people. It's just a completely natural part of the human condition to want to feel understood and cared for. Everybody wants affection and attention and intimacy. And so today I just wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about loneliness and just some ways that we can perhaps all get better at dealing with it. So in thinking about and dealing with loneliness, I feel like, first of all, it's really beneficial to get comfortable doing things alone and being in your own company. Like, I think many of us actually don't adequately distinguish between doing things alone and feeling lonely, because there's such a stigma around doing things alone, especially as a young person. Like, you're embarrassed or awkward, or like, you don't want to be seen doing something alone, you wouldn't eat a meal alone or go to the movies alone. And so even if you're not feeling lonely, you're just kind of afraid of the idea of being alone or being seen doing something alone. And I think that's something we should get over really quickly, because actually it can be wonderful to have some time on your own and to sort of nurture your own interests, or do what you need to do for you and take pleasure in doing that. Like, you don't have to constantly do things with a ton of other people. And I think just being comfortable in your own company is a huge step towards just being happier in general, because then you're not relying on other people for your sense of self and happiness. And so, of course, that's not to say that that's going to eradicate you ever feeling lonely, but I think it's important to just be able to distinguish between, okay, I'm just doing something alone versus I'm feeling lonely. And I know, like, human beings have needs, and especially if you've been single a long time, you can feel really lonely. But I also think that loneliness can make you drop your standards and make you put up with stuff, or try out something with someone purely because you're lonely, rather than because they actually have something to offer or because you actually have any chemistry. And so I would highly recommend that if you are feeling sexual and lonely, you masturbate instead of dropping your standards and letting someone treat you like shit. No more fuckboys, ladies. If you're watching, buy yourself a vibrator. Don't waste your time with people just because you're lonely. Now that all of that's out of the way, of course human beings are social creatures. I just think it's important not to feel inadequate or embarrassed of just doing things on your own or being single. Perfectly fine to be on your own, and you should enjoy being on your own sometimes. That's all I was saying. But when it comes to feelings of loneliness, psychologists actually suggest that part of the reason we're so predisposed to feeling lonely is because back in the day, in an evolution perspective, loneliness actually allowed for people to stay in a group. You were much less likely to isolate yourself if you felt lonely, right? And therefore, you were safer, you had better access to resources. It was just in your advantage to be part of the larger group, and therefore, perhaps loneliness evolved to be a big human emotion. But unfortunately, in our modern day and age, we don't really rely on each other quite in the way that we might have done at one point, and so those feelings of loneliness can be prolonged, if you don't do anything about them, and that's when they can be disadvantageous and have serious effects on your health. And so that's why I wanted to talk today about just some small things that we can do to ensure that we feel less lonely in our modern lives. So I just wanted to talk about some simple little things that I do when I'm feeling lonely and that I just think can go a long way in making everyday life much less lonely. When you think about just the way we lead our everyday lives, so many of us spend all day at office like a little robot at your computer, and then you go home. If you live alone, you're probably ordering some dinner on a food delivery app, and then watching TV or watching a movie on another app, and basically you're just spending the whole day only interacting with a gadget, and mainly in a closed space. And so of course you're going to feel lonely, right? I just think the biggest and most easy thing you can do to immediately feel better is to go outside. Like, just go for a walk or go run an errand, go to the grocery store or to the bank. Just doing a mundane task like that, which has some amount of interaction and also gets you some fresh air and sunlight, can make you feel infinitely better. Really, just get outside more. My second tip would be to put in an effort to stay in touch with your close family and friends. And I think a big step in that direction is to take initiative instead of waiting for other people to take initiative. Like, don't be shy to just make a plan or reach out. I feel like all of us have the tendency to wait till the other person suggests a meetup instead of suggesting a meetup ourselves. And so I, for one, at least try and keep my ego out of it. I really don't care whether I made the first call or they made the first call. If I'm always the one calling, it doesn't matter. So I just try and really on a weekly or daily basis with the few, 3 or 4 or 5 key people in my life, just stay connected, send those messages, make those calls. And I feel like over time, you just have a much deeper sense of connection with those people if you are constantly just in tune with each other. Also, don't be afraid to talk to these people about how you're feeling. Just getting it off your chest can do wonders, speaking to a trusted friend or family member about how you're feeling, or that you just sort of need a little bit more support and connection right now. That can just be so helpful. And also, you're normalizing these conversations, so in a way, you'll also be able to be there for them when they're feeling lonely. But I do think that before you unburden yourself on someone, it's worth just checking in with them and asking how they're doing and whether they have the emotional bandwidth to deal with your issues. It could just be a courteous thing to do, because you never know what people are going through. And again, by doing that, you're normalizing just the fact that you're in a relationship with this person, which allows you both to be perfectly honest about stuff like mental health and emotional well-being. And I think it's just a big step in anyone's friendship to have that openness and honesty, and it strengthens the connection that we're talking about. Okay, next thing, use technology wisely. I feel like technology can be this double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it connects us to a ton of people, makes being in touch with people so much easier and all of that. But on the other hand, it's also just eliminated so many human interactions we used to have. Like, you can literally get everything you need delivered to your doorstep with the click of a button. You don't have to leave your house to get food, groceries, clothes. I mean, virtually everything can come to you. And so in a way, technology can seem like a huge part of the reason we feel isolated. And yet, on the other hand, with social media, dating apps, all of this stuff, you are able to access so many more people, reach out to people you admire and like, meet new people, discover cool people. So it could also be a tool to make new connections rather than to sort of cut off connections. It really depends on how you use it and how you see it. And so I think it's really, really beneficial to keep in mind that it can do both these two things and very consciously try and ensure that it is enhancing your life and your sense of self and connection instead of sort of isolating you and making you feel more and more alone. And so I would always try to reach out to people I really like and admire and create actual connections online rather than just chasing likes from strangers, and getting caught up with FOMO by just looking at what everybody else is doing and stuff like that. I think if you can use the internet to augment authentic connections and lead internet connections into in real life interactions with people that you were really looking forward to getting to know, then it can be super, super cool and super inspiring. And I try and make my internet usage sort of that happy, inspiring, new connections universe rather than something that makes me feel sort of cut off and inadequate and alone. Another thing that I find to be a huge cure for loneliness is to make some non-human friends. Growing up, I had dogs, cats, turtles, bunnies, birds. We'd had like a little zoo in our house, literally. And it was the best. I so miss having an animal. Unfortunately, I travel way too much now to have my own dog or cat or anything. Honestly, I would keep a goat or a donkey. Give me any animal. I just love animals. And I think that the love that a human being is capable of and the care that a human being is capable of with regard to an animal is one of the most beautiful and heartwarming experiences ever. If you haven't had a pet, you should experience it. And if you can't afford to sort of deal with being responsible for another life in your house on a daily basis, which I completely understand. I myself am not in a position to do it right now. One easy way to at least experience some of that is just by feeding the stray dogs in your neighborhood, or even putting out milk for a cat in the building. Or there's no dearth, right, of homeless animals at least in India. So that's just a nice way of caring for an animal, even if you can't adopt it. Just feeding it, hanging out with it, and it's amazing. You might think you're doing the animal a favor, but believe me, the animal is doing you a favor. By the way, I recently read 2 books, probably the best 2 books I've read all year, that deal with loneliness and human-animal relationships. One is the Traveling Cat Chronicles, which I actually brought to show you because it's so good. It moved me so much. I highly recommend this book by a Japanese author called Hiro Arikawa. And the other book was called Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I read it on Kindle, so I don't have it here. But highly recommend these 2 books, and you should definitely check them out. Just if you're a literature buff like I am, but particularly if you love animals. Okay, and finally, this brings me to my last point. Do something active and make reading and writing a habit. I feel like I recommend these 3 things in literally every video I make, but they are genuinely the cure for everything. Sadness, boredom, loneliness, you name it. I think of exercise and reading and writing as maintenance activities. The way you have to water a plant regularly, exercising and reading and writing are like watering your brain and heart and soul. And if you just make them part of your daily life, it is amazing. The benefits are just amazing. And I really, really highly recommend going outdoors for the exercise if you can, because then you're getting the dual benefits of that sunlight and fresh air along with your walk or run or whatever you want to do outdoors. And reading and writing, it doesn't matter what you read, and you can just write your thoughts. You don't have to be a gifted writer to write, just keeping a journal and just the practice of reading and writing regularly has unbelievable benefits. I feel like I can't sell them to you. You have to just experience them. Just try it for a week, and I'm sure you won't stop. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you find these tips helpful. And if you have any other ideas on how to deal with loneliness, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. As always, I'd love it if you liked the video. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.